Hello and welcome to today's episode of 10 Minutes with Marshall. So today we're going to take a deeper look at anger. The very first thing we're going to do is ask that question, what is anger? Then we're going to look at how it feels within our bodies, how it's expressed within our behaviors, and also how we experience it within our minds. Then we're going to move on to looking at what does anger tell us? Also querying along with that if it tells us anything at all. And lastly, we're going to look at what we can do about the things that anger may or may not reveal to us about what's going on within our lives. So an interesting thought before we dive into all of that, guys, and I think you guys might find it equally interesting, is that many speakers in many different ways have often talked about how emotions like anger are the expressions of our genes. So they are sort of the voice of our DNA, of our genetic makeup, and along with that also of the attributes that we pick up in our nature, right? Because there's nature and there's nurture. But I think that's an interesting thought to sort of move away from the societal view of looking at anger as a negative emotion and sort of viewing it along with all the other emotions as just an emotion. So yeah, hold on to that, guys. But for now, let's take a look at what anger is. If I had to define anger, which I do, I would say that it is a natural and automatic response. It's the way that we react to pain. And it doesn't really matter whether that pain is emotional or physical. Very often, whether it's imagined or experienced, the important thing is that that pain is experienced as an unpleasant sensation. And so it often manifests itself in a very visceral and angry way. That's why anger is such a strong emotion. You know, in the times when I've been angry myself, I would say that it's often started off with a sense of being hurt. That's consistent. And then that feeling of being hurt then grows into a feeling of annoyance, which typically sometimes then spirals into full-blown rage. But that's okay. And that's not just me excusing myself. That's me saying that anger is a normal, usual, healthy human emotion. If it wasn't, we wouldn't have it. And I know that sounds very simple, but that's the case with all of our emotions. They are there for a reason. It's how we make use of those emotions and how we understand them that really matters. So typically, our society tends to view anger as a negative thing, but I don't think it is. I think, like all of our emotions, it is reflecting something of our world back to us. But we'll sort of go into that in a bit more detail later. For now, I want to leave you guys with this thought. Let's look at fire. For hundreds of years, human beings have been making use of fire. From it, we take our heat. With it, we cook our food. But by it, we are frequently and have been frequently burnt for those millennia that we have been using it. But can we therefore then say that fire is a negative thing? I would say no. And so that's a very useful way of looking at emotions. In and of themselves, they are neither good nor bad, but just like fire, they are capable of doing both good and bad, and it's how we relate to those emotions. It's how we use those things that sort of our DNA and our makeup is giving us, those tools, and it's how we relate to them that really matters. So let's take a deeper look at some of the symptoms of anger. So how do we feel it in our minds? How do we feel it within our bodies? And how is it expressed? How does it impact our lives? How do we recognize anger? Well, sometimes anger is shouting, sometimes it's sulking, but it can be even more of what are considered sort of extreme reactions, like starting fights or breaking things. But there are even times when anger turns inwards and, leads to things like self-harm. Now, these are all behaviors, right? But what about physically? Now, physically, anger is often recognized by feelings such as an accelerated heartbeat. So you can literally feel it within your body, within your physiology. Your heart thuds in your chest. Very often, though, you can't actually feel it within the moment because, like I said a bit earlier, the emotion is so intense that it often sort of dulls out your awareness. So even though this physiological reaction is happening, very often you can't express it. You're not there. You're not able to be aware enough. And that's an interesting thing because very often researchers say that when you're caught up in an emotion, when you're thinking with your emotional brain, it's very hard for your analytical brain, so your cognitive brain, to think in a way that is rational and logical. So that's just an interesting thought there. But the thing with feelings is that you can go your whole life feeling something. So all of these things I've described, guys, I think we all know them, right? We've all felt them at various points in our existences, but it's never really until you speak them, until you give them your own sort of unique, unavoidably unique understanding or expression through your language, that you can then begin to really assimilate that knowledge and make use of it. Because very often we carry around this sense of what the thing is, but our words bridge that gap between our feeling brain and our analytical brain. So sometimes the two of them can't quite understand each other. They have different concerns, different sort of priorities. Whatever the case is, they are speaking different languages at various points. And sometimes they need that universal language, that sort of common tongue, our words, to be able to enter into a dialogue with each other, to be able to understand and to be able to initiate that understanding, which I spoke about. You know, it's a metaphor, but I think it's one that applies. And there's research that definitely suggests that within our solar plexus, so somewhere between the area where our chest ends and our sort of stomach area begins, there has been discovered a second brain, an emotional brain. And you know, this is a feeling brain, and that's sort of too interesting to go into here. I think that deserves an episode of its own. But you know, that sort of again highlights how much of an impact our emotions have, and just how much development they also require, along with our analytical cognitive brain as we go through life. It leads us nicely into thinking about the ways that anger is expressed psychologically within our minds. And very often when we're angry, we sometimes feel a bit anxious or nervous, and it's very hard to relax, and you're also irritated. You may even feel humiliated and almost as if the world is conspiring against you. You know, all of these things happen in a flash, but they happen, and so they're real, and it's important to understand them. Maybe anger in you feels slightly different, so it's important just to pay attention to that. But remember, guys, that they are just feelings. It's how we understand and make use of these feelings that really matter. So let's look at how we can make use of our anger, how we can make our anger positive. A very useful way to view emotions, like anger, is as clues. So very often they show us something about what's going on in the world around us, and they also give us an insight into how we feel about what's going on in the world around us. So even humiliation, which we were just talking about, seems overwhelmingly negative, right? But if your anger comes alongside, together with humiliation, you have to stop and ask yourself, am I feeling humiliated because of something that I'm doing? Or am I feeling humiliated because of something that's being done to me? And so what do I need to do to stop feeling that way? Is that a case of altering my own behavior? Or is it a case of having a maybe difficult conversation with somebody and getting them to alter their behavior? Or is it a case of taking necessary steps to remove negative influences from your life? And, you know, when I say remove, I don't mean anything too drastic, but guys, if someone is sort of constantly and repeatedly making you feel bad about yourself, don't expose yourself unnecessarily and repeatedly to those influences. Love yourself. And so I hope that's been a very useful way of viewing anger, and how you can sort of transform it into a useful tool for writing the things that sort of need to be balanced within your life. And I hope that we're sort of gradually moving away from viewing our intense emotions like anger as negative things. You know, even if all the use we make of anger is being able to spot it sooner, that's incredibly beneficial, right? As ever, guys, if you've enjoyed it or feel like you've learned something from it, then please do help us by sharing and spreading the word, because we genuinely believe that the more people come into contact with information about what's going on within their bodies and within their minds and about their emotions, then the more and more people can begin to make positive changes within their lives. I don't know if anyone out there has ever been carrying around that constant nagging feeling that somehow, in some way, our lives are not quite going in the direction that we want them to. But emotions are a very useful way of knowing the situation that our lives are in, and also gaining insight into the changes, the positive changes that we need to make in order to then get our lives onto the track that we envisage for ourselves, and to moving us a little bit closer to our goals. So yes, guys, I really hope you've enjoyed it, but for now, that's 10 minutes.